Welcome, everybody. We're going to sit here in awkward silence for a few minutes until it's time to start the webinar. Wait for people to come on in. I see some familiar names joining us. Nice to see you all. As you come in, I'd love for you to drop your name and where you're from in the chat. If you're affiliated with an organization, what organization? If you're not, where in the world are you? Oh, Columbus, Ohio in the house. Hi, Valerie and Eileen. And Christy. Our current interim CEO is actually based in Columbus. She comes in every couple of weeks, but she is a Columbus native and she's wonderful. As Pittsburghers, Columbus is sort of a neighbor around the block. Not right next door, but close enough. All right, we're going to give folks, excellent. We're just bosom buddies of the not quite Midwest. We'll give folks another minute to join us. I know I am always struggling to find the link to the webinar to join on time, so give folks a little grace time. Happy Earth Month, everyone. For the folks that are just coming in, if you drop your name and where you're from in the chat, either the organization that you're with or where you're from in the country, either one, we'd love to know who's here with us today.
Jen, I'm going to go a little off scripted and post the pre-registration link for the Food Rescue Conference right now, just so folks have a chance in the beginning of the meeting to sign up.
Okay, great. Hi, Juliet. All right, great. Well, we will go ahead and get started. Happy to see all of you here today on this, as we talk about Earth Month. I know that some of you are in active food recovery organizations, and so some of this is going to be, right up your alley. You already know this. For others, maybe you're here because you're interested in understanding about how food recovery is a great way to care for both the planet and your community. Oh, it's not me, Karen, it's you. So, we start with the fact that 40% or up to 40% of the food that we produce goes to waste. And food is the #1 material in the landfill. I find that number stunning every time I see it. And this is what I do every day. It is still just such a shock that we throw away so much food. And of course, fruits and vegetables are wasted at the highest rate of any category of food. At about 45%. And that's, of course, because fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh produce is, has a short shelf life. It's going to go bad eventually. If we take the example of just the tomato, I think it's incredible how many tomatoes we throw away each year, 21 tomatoes per person. And I'm not here to shame anybody. I have to admit, I threw away 2 tomatoes recently because I just did not get to them. They were sort of behind something in my fridge and I didn't see them. I feel terrible. That is $166 billion worth of tomatoes that we throw away every year as a country. When organic waste is put into a landfill, it breaks down in a process called anaerobic decomposition. And this means that it's breaking down without the presence of oxygen or microorganisms. So I was taught when I was growing up that food is biodegradable, right? And that it's fine. You can just throw your food on the side of the road or throw your apple core and it doesn't matter. That's true because there it has access to air and other microorganisms. But when you put it in a landfill, it is subject to anaerobic decomposition. And this creates byproducts that are greenhouse gases, methane and carbon dioxide. And they're both very potent greenhouse gases. Aaron? Global greenhouse gas emission producers, food waste in landfill is 10% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. Compare that to India. The country of India is only 7%, and global air travel is only 4%. So if you really want to talk about making an impact on climate change or climate emissions, air travel, if everybody quit flying everywhere, would only reduce global emissions by 4%, whereas keeping food, good food, out of a landfill would reduce it by 10%. That is a much more achievable and realistic and impactful goal than eliminating global air travel. When we throw away food, it's not just the impact it has on with those emissions. We're also throwing away all of the energy that was used to make that food, right? So we spent energy, all of which has a climate impact, that we didn't need to spend to create food that we then throw away that then has an impact on the climate. There was a study that was just published, I think last year or 2021, that globally every year we throw away 344 metric tons of food, avoidable food waste. That is 4 trillion megajoules of energy that was used to produce that food that we then throw away. These numbers are stunning. This is the equivalent of charging your cell phone every day for 2.1 billion years. This is the equivalent of driving around the Earth's equator 333 million times. That is energy that we are spending to throw it in the garbage. Similarly, water. We use water to grow food, produce food that is then wasted, avoidable food waste. And we think about how many agricultural areas have faced drought conditions in the last couple of years. And I know we've seen incredibly record-breaking rainfall in some places this year, which has its own negative consequences, but that those areas that have been affected by drought, they're using water to produce food that gets thrown away. 82 billion cubic meters of water is spent growing and producing food that gets thrown away. That would mean every human on the planet does 1 load of laundry per week for 3 years. You could take a shower every day for 6.3 billion years. I'd rather do that one than the laundry once a week because I hate doing laundry, but either way, it's a waste of water. And again, we're taking that natural resource and we are, using it to produce food that then goes into the landfill and creates greenhouse gas emissions. So up to 40% of food produced goes to waste, and we've talked about that impact. But on the flip side of that, 1 in 10 people face food insecurity. And that number changes when we look at different populations in different areas. It can go up dramatically. So if 12.7% of the US population is food insecure, 16.6% of households with children are food insecure. And when we are talking households headed by single women, it is 30%. That is 30% of the children that are living in single female headed households are food insecure. Less than 1/3 of the food that we throw out would be enough to feed this population. So it's just it's two independent problems that are causing a lot of social ills that we can actually then put together to be a solution. However, food rescue, which is, what we're proposing as a solution, what we're talking about as a solution, can still really be a challenge. Starbucks pledged in 2016 to donate 100% of its unsold food. And notice that was from March. In April, they were noting that it wasn't as easy as it seemed. They thought that they could just, sort of snap their fingers and make this happen, but it's really hard. Running a food rescue, creating impact with food rescue is difficult because wasted food happens in a highly distributed network when we're talking about, really when we're talking about any food waste, but if we talk about that retail sector, those are anybody that is not a household, not a manufacturing plant, and not a farm. So that could be schools, it could be grocery stores, it could be cafes, it could be a corporate cafeteria, hospitals, just that whole big sector of food producers and food sellers. There are thousands of locations. This map is just the Walmarts, for example. Every single Walmart on that map is wasting food every single day. And then you add to that all of the schools and hospitals and other grocery stores and Targets and corner markets and bagel shops and cafes and restaurants. And it's incredible the amount of places that are wasting food every single day. And that food is time sensitive. Rescuing that food is time sensitive. A lot of times it's short dated food or fresh food that, can't be sold in time, or sometimes it just isn't pretty enough. Or has been overproduced, but all of it still has to be eaten now, which makes it really difficult to pick up all that food, to keep it out of the landfill, and to get it where it can actually do good for people. So the question then becomes, how do you cost effectively recover food from a highly distributed network? And I think, we've found the answer that resonates with us and that I think resonates with a lot of food recovery organizations is using a highly engaged volunteer network. Because if you think about it, people who want to do good are just as highly distributed as all of that food waste. There are more people that are actually interested in doing good than there are places that are throwing away food, probably. So if you can use that network of volunteers to pick up that food, 100 pounds at a time, 50 pounds at a time, every day from all of those places, and then get it to where it can do good, you're keeping it out of the landfill, and you're addressing the issue of hunger in the community. The Food Rescue Hero Network, for example, which is just 15 partners, has rescued almost 150 million pounds since 2015. Now, our first partner did not sign on until I shouldn't say that. 412 Food Rescue was the organization that produced the technology in the first place. And we've been rescuing food since 2015. But our first partner started with us in 2018, and we really didn't get the ball rolling until 2020, 2021. So in a really short amount of time, these 15 organizations have taken us from just a few million pounds to almost 150 million pounds of food rescued, which is equivalent to 121 million, extra commas there, meals. But it's also almost 80 million pounds of CO2 mitigated. And that was accomplished with 42,000 food rescue heroes registering for the app. I want to talk a little bit about those pounds of CO2 mitigated. If many of you might be on ReFed's mailing list, and so you got the email today announcing what they've been working on for a while, which is revamping how we calculate CO2 impact and emissions from wasted food. So this number is purely sort of an average of the carbon emissions of the average mix of food that decomposes in a landfill. So it's just that sort of downstream result of throwing away food. But in reality, the impact of throwing away food is much bigger, because if we go back and think about the energy that was used to produce that food, the water resources that were used to produce those food, the resources that were used to get that food from the farm or the manufacturer to the store. We're talking about an upstream impact that is actually exponentially larger than that impact. Sorry, I see your question, Eileen. It got me all distracted. I started thinking. So the impact becomes much larger. It's actually exponentially larger. Now, I think that the number that they had been using previous to today was about 2.5. So if you include the upstream impact of food waste on the emissions, you're looking at about 2.5. But what's really cool, what ReFed has done and is put together a table, an impact table that takes into account the actual value of each particular type of food, and how that impacts or what the environmental impact of that food is. Because as we know, for example, beef has an enormous impact on the environment. The amount of energy used to create a hamburger is tremendous versus a carrot. Right. And so their new impact calculator will actually look at the upstream as well as the downstream impact of food based on food type. We will also be implementing that as we look at what our numbers look like moving forward, so we can really understand a more nuanced approach to the impact on the environment of food waste. What's really exciting about this, though, is that I know in the face of so much bad news about the climate, that it can be paralyzing and overwhelming and thinking, well, how can I do good? But really, it takes everybody to save food and to get it to where it can go to have an impact. The power to help the world really is in your hands. We all have the power to, save the world, so to speak, by becoming somebody who is rescuing food, is keeping the food out of that landfill. And you can also do that in your own home. And I think all of us who are here and are interested in this do our best to not waste food at home. Don't beat yourself up when you do. We all do it. As I just said, I just threw away 2 tomatoes. But maybe start a compost in your backyard, or find other ways to deal with food waste, so that even when you do have those 2 tomatoes that you just don't get to, they're not going to a landfill. And we all have the power to make that impact every day. And with that, we will turn to questions. And I think that Eileen already had a question. Yeah, that's a great question, Eileen. And to be honest, I'm not sure I can answer that technically. I think a lot of times we kind of use CO2 as a fill-in for meaning all greenhouse gas emissions for food waste. I wish Sean were here to answer that.
Jen, you see the question below from Matt.
I do. Yeah.
What are the incentives for food distributors to do this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of incentives for food distributors to do this. So first of all, we're all seeing the climate news. Everybody is feeling the pressure to be better climate actors, and corporations, whether out of the goodness of their heart or whether for marketing purposes, are not blind to the need to do better. And so a lot of grocers and distributors and food producers are actually really buckling down on their commitment to taking food out of the waste stream, whether it's through composting, through recycling, or through donation. There are a lot of retailers that are making that commitment. It's also good for them in terms of their public relations or their impact in the community. People want to see corporations and see businesses doing good work. And so there is absolutely a win for them in saying that we're not throwing food away. We're giving it to people in our community who need it. And then honestly, at the end of the day, retailers are people too, and they also want to make sure that their neighbors are not hungry. You know, we talk to a lot of people that work at grocery stores and work at bakeries, then they hate to see food get thrown away. They know what goes into producing that and into, you know, housing it and selling it. And it pains them to throw it away. So a lot of donors, a lot of potential food donors are really excited to be able to participate and make this happen. And then finally, there is also a tax incentive. There is an enhanced tax donation credit for businesses that donate food. It's pretty complicated to work out. I couldn't tell you about it, but it is very valuable for some businesses to be able to do that. Oh, Minnie, bless you, Minnie. Thank you. Hi, Minnie. Minnie Ringland here is the person at Refed that was working on these numbers and working on creating the new impact numbers on how to understand the impact of food waste, which are so exciting. If you haven't been to their website to check out their impact calculator, you should definitely go and look at the new version.
We have another question from an attendee asking, how do you measure the pounds of food that was rescued?
Yeah, so with our technology, our volunteers are able to let us know what they've picked up and what it was. And so we're able to get the weight that way. Yes. Thank you, Minnie. Thank God you're here. Yeah, if you have any more questions about the technicality of how this is calculated, you can ask Minnie. I will tell you, I stopped trying to really understand it when I realized there was a resource that I did not have to think about it. If I don't have to spend my brain power there, I am happy not to. Do we have other questions?
Valerie Jacqueline just asked, what's next in the food rescue space? So vague, but good question.
I mean, that is a great question. I think in the food rescue space, we're about to see a real, I don't want to call it a renaissance because I don't think there was ever that to me that like implies a rebirthing, a reinvigoration. I think we're about to see an invigoration of the space that retailers are recognizing that, you know, they need strong food recovery partnerships in order to meet their needs. California just passed SB 1383. New York passed a similar law. Both of them require tier one, like supermarket food sellers to donate food and prevent food from going into the waste stream. They have to prioritize donation as opposed to composting so that it gets to people in need. So I think we're going to see a sort of a waterfall effect of that legislation and of some corporate entities becoming really interested in upping their game. I think it's really exciting and really exciting time to be in food rescue.
Juliet Eden asked, Jen, you mentioned that there was an update to a number calculator that just happened this morning. I missed what you said. Can you please re-explain that update?
Absolutely. So that is the Refed impact calculator. It's on their website. Minnie, can you possibly drop a link in the chat?
And while on the topic, we also had somebody else ask Minnie to explain the shifts of methodology that changed to more accurately reflect the upstream and downstream environmental impacts of food waste.
Yeah.
So I don't know that Minnie is able to present during this webinar.
I think I can promote her. Are you willing, Minnie? I mean, I hate to put you on the spot, but would you be willing to chime in? This would be really exciting.
We may be able to let Minnie do that, but for now I've got okay, so we'll do that in just a second. But Jen, well, yeah, I guess let's work on doing that right now. Let me see if I can promote Minnie.
Yeah.
Hang on. Cool.
Find her. There we go. Oh, fantastic. Take it away.
Hi, sorry, I wasn't quite prepared to be chiming in, so let me know if I didn't quite catch the question, but I'll drop the link to our insights engine. And actually, this is amazing timing because we literally this morning just launched a big update with 2020 and 2021 data. So, a bunch of our tools are available there, including the impact calculator. I will say that we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, and the user interface on the website for the impact calculator right now does not reflect the updated data. But if you do a data download by clicking the button in the top right corner, that data is up to date. And we're hoping to have that resolved in the next week or so.
And Jake, can you repeat the question for her? So she.
Yeah. So, and I think you answered that first one. You mentioned there was an update to a number calculator that happened this morning. Can you re-explain that update, which I think, I don't know.
Yeah, so it's a major update to all the different tools that are part of the Insights engine. I think what I covered in a previous webinar with you all was a couple adjustments that we made specifically to how we model food rescue in the impact calculator. And so, it's a little complicated, but basically you want to add up the emissions that food is responsible for as it moves through the supply chain. So once you reach the point of generation, like when it's a waste generation, so say like a grocery retailer can't sell something because it's past the sell by date, and so they've decided that they want to donate it or something like that. So the food that's being donated is responsible for all the emissions that happened in the supply chain up to that point, plus any emissions downstream of that. So whatever storage, transport is required to get food from the store to the food bank, and then from the food bank to the home. And then if it doesn't get eaten in the home, then also any landfill emissions associated with that. So previously, all of that was included in the footprint of donated food, but just based on our understanding of how people are really using this data, it tends to be food rescue organizations that are trying to calculate their impact. And we felt that it wasn't necessarily fair to ask them to accept the sort of logistical distribution emissions when you're doing such a great thing by rescuing this food and ultimately preventing upstream production again of food that doesn't need to be grown or produced or moved through the supply chain. So hopefully, I don't know if that was a very clear explanation, but hopefully the impact of food rescue will look even better compared to the status quo after this update.
Yes, we are. Yeah, we're super excited. Thank you so much for being here and being able to explain that. I did my best, but not even close to that clear.
Julie, I know you asked a question about the shifts in methodology. I hope that answered it. Please let us know if it did not, and we can, of course, re-invite Minnie back to explain a little bit more. But thank you so much for joining us, Minnie. I certainly appreciate it.
Yep. So I think we have some more questions in here. Where do volunteers drop the food at? And Minnie, if you'd like to, you can go. You don't have to stay, or you can stay in case there's more questions. It's up to you. Do what feels good. Just let us know. Okay.
So we have a couple more questions. Let's start with where do volunteers drop the rescued food at?
Yeah. So we work with a bunch of different places, and most of our partners work with a bunch of different places. And the trick is, when you're rescuing food, there's a lot more fresh food that suddenly needs a home than the traditional distribution system really has been used to handling. So, food pantries, which do the lion's share of work in making sure that food insecurity is addressed, often have minimal hours, and food is rescued outside the days that they're open. And so food recovery organizations tend to really need to have a broad scope of places to drop off food. So things like housing authorities and senior high rises where that the population that lives there is food insecure, or Head Start programs and family support programs where low-income children and families are receiving services, job training programs, veterans programs. So anywhere that there are people who are facing food insecurity, are going about the business of living, those make great places to drop off fresh food, because it gets that short dated food into their hands immediately so that they can consume it quickly while it's still good. And we have a network in Pittsburgh of about 800 nonprofit partners. And I cannot tell you what our whole network number is right now. Maybe probably
I can look that up in a second while you're answering.
like 8,000, I think. But yeah, if you could look that up.
The next question of what is the difference between your organization, Food Rescue Hero, and let's say Feeding America?
Yeah, so they're very different. So Feeding America is an organization that works with food pantries and sort of a network of food pantries. It's kind of a hub and spoke model. So you'll have a food bank in an area that has a warehouse where you're storing food that will go out by truck to food pantries, right? And people can access food from those pantries. Usually once a month. Sometimes you can get emergency food twice a month, but it's really, again, it's been the backbone of anti-hunger programs for 30, 40 years in this country, and it does a solid job. Food recovery has a dual purpose. It's both about saving food that would otherwise go to the waste stream, as well as ending hunger. So again, because most of the food that we rescue is fresh, the majority of it is going directly to the distribution point via volunteers. So there's no warehouse, there's no storage of that, which would sort of tick away the time that a consumer has to use that. Food Rescue tends to take food directly to a nonprofit that's working with food insecure people from the donation point. And oftentimes, if it's something like a senior high rise, you're really getting it right into the hands of the people who are going to eat that food. So from the time it's donated to the time it, is available to somebody to be eaten could be 30 minutes. And that's sort of the big difference. They're complementary systems.
Jen, two more that I'd like to add to that are the donors setting the parameters of the donation, largely setting the parameters of the donation, and then also the recipient's right of refusal, which is really helpful and instrumental in not wasting food, right? Because if we're dropping off food to recipients who don't want it or aren't able to use it, right, then we're really just extending the waste and putting that onus on the actual nonprofit recipients themselves. So I think those are two really important things to also.
Yeah, we really work hard to make sure that when we pick up food, not food waste, surplus food, right? That we're taking it somewhere that said, yes, I actually can use that today, right now, so that it stays as food and does not actually become waste. We're not, taking somebody's surplus and turning it into a nonprofit's garbage. Jake, there's another one.
It's loading the data on how many recipients we've had. In the meantime, though, I'm going to post in the chat links for the next webinar. If you're interested in starting a food rescue, to please set up a meeting with me on my calendar, and then the pre-registration link for our Food Rescue Hero conference in October.
Yeah, and as Minnie was talking about, that's where last year she came and talked to our audience about food recovery and the climate impact of food waste. And so we look forward this year to having some more content like that is really appropriate for food recovery organizations, as well as for people who are interested in maybe starting a food recovery organization or just interested in, reducing food waste. So if there are no more questions, then I'll give everyone a moment to grab those links.
For some reason, it's taking a while to actually load the data. See if there's another way that I can pull it. I guess I'm probably, because I'm looking at all time.
I just want to say Charmaine posted that in Ontario, they have a program called Loop where the stores work with the farmers. And to me that, the problem of food waste is that it is so big and so dispersed, that it takes a lot of people working together with a lot of different solutions. And so I love those type of solutions where you're actually just reducing the source of food waste, or, you're cooperating to try to figure out ways to minimize the amount of food that might actually go into a landfill or might need to be rescued. Because as we saw, 1/3 of all of the food that is wasted would basically end hunger, would meet the needs of everybody that is facing food insecurity. So we really need to work on both reduction as well as rescue.
So the actual, like, the all-time number of nonprofits is still not loading, but for 2022, active nonprofits, meaning nonprofits that actually donated, was a little bit over 4,400 across our entire network, or that we were delivered to. And I believe those include cities that are doing home deliveries in there. So that number might include some actual individual households. Looks like there are a few more questions, Jen, in addition to that. 146 million pounds of food rescued. How many trucks is that? That's an interesting question.
Very few trucks. Most of our rescues are done with volunteers' cars.
Yeah, we do. Several of our partners do have truck operations, but largely, yes, that is all volunteer based.
Yeah, we have a fleet as well in Pittsburgh, but it is significantly less than our volunteer efforts. Most of the food that we rescue is volunteer. We use the trucks when we have things like pallets that just really are impractical to use for volunteers.
Yep. Charmaine asked, at your food banks, what do you do with what is not given out? So I want to first dispel that all of our partners, it's not a food banking model. There are some of our partners that do have warehousing models, but again, a lot of it is rapid response recovery taken directly from donor to nonprofit. But Jen, do you want to answer what we do with food that is not given?
We do have sometimes where somebody will receive a weekly donation from somewhere and it's like 10 times what they expected for some reason. They call us, we get that food and we take it somewhere else. And so we're really committed to making sure that food is staying out of the landfill. If we have food, we work with our local food bank. We pick up from them on Fridays, the produce that they have not given out that week. We rescue from food pantries that have leftovers when they're, closing down for the week. So we're really committed to just wherever there is surplus food, getting it and making sure it gets where it can be used. We actually did a study with a professor at Pitt in 2018, which we're actually getting ready to redo because that's been too long ago. We can't rest on those laurels anymore. But we looked in Pittsburgh at whether or not the food that we were distributing was actually being used. We claim we're saving all this food. Are we? Can we make that claim? And we did find, in fact, that the vast majority of food, there's always going to be a little bit like, I just threw away 2 tomatoes I bought. That's always going to be, that's always going to happen. However, it is very minimal. The majority, like 95, 99% of the food that we rescue is eaten.
And again, that kind of comes back to the point I was talked about very briefly earlier, that right of refusal. Nonprofits within our network always have the right to say, no, I can't accept that on a weekly basis, or I can't even accept that today, even if I've been accepting it for the past, year. It just, for whatever reason, won't work out today. So yeah.
I want to answer the one about the car emissions from cars. We actually, so because we use technology, right?
Can you repeat the question for the rest of the folks on the call?
Sure. Do y'all have suggestion for talking about the emissions associated with volunteers driving their car for food rescue versus avoiding emissions associated with food waste? Yeah, absolutely. We actually, because we use an app, we know exactly the mileage that cars are driven in order to rescue food. And we can calculate that it is still a significant net, I was going to say profit, but that's not the word I want, net saving in terms of preventing greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a win-win. You're preventing that food from going to waste, right? Which is actually a small amount of the emissions, what happens in the landfill, versus you're also preventing it from having to be remanufactured, which is maybe twice the amount of emissions that it would actually emit, and you're helping end hunger. So it's a super net positive.
Julie asked, what are your biggest barriers your organization is facing, specifically in regards to a changing climate?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I think, like everybody, we are living in a world that's facing increasing climate disasters. And those are really impacting communities and their ability to, survive. We were just talking with somebody from Little Rock, like 2 weeks ago. I had a phone call with her, and like 5 minutes before the tornado hit, in Little Rock, and they're a food recovery organization. And she, first I said, "Are you okay? Did you guys get hit? Is everyone safe?" But she said, yes, we're all safe, but we're now scrambling to meet the need of the community that was impacted by that tornado. And we're seeing this like ramp up of climate disasters. Our partner in California, 530 Food Rescue, they have 10,000 climate refugees in their community because of the Camp Fire in Northern California. Climate change is going to impact all of us. And those of us that are working to end hunger are going to see more people that are displaced from their homes and facing those challenges. And that's going to be everywhere. I mean, I don't think there's anywhere that's not going to feel that impact. So that is a big challenge, because again, like, we're talking about climate and the impact on climate, but we're also a hunger fighting org. And the impact of climate change is really going to ramp that up.
And then the final question that we've got right now, how much of your budget comes from the government and how much comes from donations?
None comes from the government. We had a one program in 2020 that was government funded during the pandemic, and that was purchasing food from restaurants that were shut down because of the pandemic, and then we were delivering that to people in need. That was government funded, but everything else is from foundations, from individual donors, from corporate donations, but mostly foundations and individual donations. I'd like to point out that I do think that the government and others should be investing in reducing food waste through food recovery. I think it's an investment in the community. I think there's a ROI, a return on investment, in that it has a real impact on reducing climate change emissions that are pushing climate change, right? It's got a real impact on that, and it has a real impact on reducing hunger, increasing nutrition security, increasing food access, and making better outcomes for communities. And I really think we should start talking about spending money on food recovery, whether they're funding you or they're funding us or somebody else. We should start talking about it as an investment, not as a charitable donation, which is something that people do because they're kind-hearted and doesn't have any benefit aside from helping somebody.
I'm reading an educational or a paper written by a professor kind of on that, of the long-term effects of children who start off their life on SNAP and EBT benefits and things like that, and what long-term effects that have. I just printed out and started reading it. So, but that's kind of exactly that, of like, we should invest in early childhood development and food from an early standpoint. And I think it, obviously I don't know what the paper says, but my assumption is that it has pretty profound long-term impacts. So totally
Healthcare cost. We have healthcare systems that are looking into funding food rescue because the cost to those systems, from diseases associated with food insecurity, are tremendous. So I just urge everybody that is in food recovery, as you're working on writing grants, as you're talking to people, as you're talking to donors, to really challenge people to think about this as an investment in making our communities better. All right.
One more question. Right? Yeah. How do you promote your app?
What was it?
How do you promote your app?
Great. Yeah, so we each organization that is in our network does it sort of on their own because it's their community, right? And they know what resonates in their community. Social media is a huge way to promote it. Peer-to-peer networking. We actually have a thing in our app that says invite a friend. So when somebody does a food rescue and finds it easy and satisfying and fun, they can ask somebody to join them. So that's a great way to do it. And of course, media is super impactful. We actually just had a spot on the Today Show this week on Tuesday, which we're pretty excited about. And Table to Table, who's here now, did an amazing job with that rescue. And that drives interest. It's really once you tell people the story of food recovery, they're either hooked, like they're in, or it's not for them. And that's fine. It doesn't have to be for them, but it really, just getting that message out in front of people, you're going to find your people.
And yeah, on that note, if you're interested in learning more about how to bring Food Rescue Hero to your area, or just would like to learn a little bit more about our technology, our methodology, you can set up a meeting with me. I will drop my Calendly link again. Happy to take some time to discuss it with you individually. And would love to hear from you.
Yeah. And, if you're an individual that came to us through that Today Show or through somewhere else, look for a food recovery organization in your community. There may be one there. We're not the only people around doing this. There's tons of organizations and even other technologies, and it just takes that big community. We're so proud to be part of that community, and we want to continue to foster that, all of the different solutions. We do have a how to start a food rescue guide on our website if you're interested in that, if you don't find one in your area. But whatever you do as you go forward from this, I hope that you are more aware of the impact of food waste and how food recovery makes it is a way for everybody to participate in solutions to both climate change and community need. So thank you, everybody. Oh, Jake.
Well, just two more things. I guess one is a comment by Charmaine. In my community, we have what's called Better Beginning, where we teach parents with young children to cook and make better use of food such as lentils. Wonderful. I think that's a great initiative. And then another attendee asked, "Are you a 501c3?" I can answer that. Sure. Yes.
We definitely do not profit.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time. Jen, I'll leave any closing statements up to you. You've got the links in the chat.
Hey, Randy. Randy's also a great resource on food recovery and starting food rescue. So if you want to just drop your website in the chat real quick, Randy, is it bethechange.org? I'm not sure. I can't remember. I'm sorry. Another great resource. Anyway, look up Be the Change and as another great resource for getting food rescue up and running. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.